Hello again. Okay, so y'all didn't learn anything, right? So hello again. Much better. Yeah, you guys will graduate with flying colors. I love this. Welcome to our next panel, Shades of Access, the intersections of race, gender, and disability in reproduction and sexuality. My name again is Shakir Underdown. This panel will discuss the ways in which pregnancy-capable folks at the intersection of racial identity, gender sexuality, and disability status experience barriers to accessing sexual health and reproductive support. Additionally, we will address how medical providers, support workers, and educators can work with accessibility in mind to ensure their care is inclusive of all folks who need access. I will start by introducing our wonderful panelists. So to my right, we have Dessa Cosmo. Her pronouns are she, her. Dessa is the founding director of Detroit Disability Power. She is committed to bridging the gap between disability inclusion work and other social justice efforts in order to build big, powerful movements that dismantle interlocking systems of oppression. Welcome. And to my immediate left, Dara Baldwin, pronouns she, her. She's an activist, scholar, and an author. She's an adjunct professor at McCourt School of Public Policy and the McDonald School of Business at both at Georgetown University. She's also co-director of the Policy Innovation Lab, known as PIL, and a strategist, writer, instructor, project manager, connector, change maker, and policy maker. She's also a powerhouse and will be signing books. You should get one. Next to Dara, we have Madeline Morcell, pronouns she, her. Madeline is a senior attorney at the National Health Law Program, known as NHELP. She leads NHELP's initiatives on non-discrimination protections in sexual and reproductive health care, sexual and reproductive health equity for people with disabilities, and federally closing the Medicaid expansion coverage gap. Madeline also serves as a movement lawyer to national reproductive justice groups, advising on matters related to Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, and civil rights. And then at the far end of our table here, we have Robin Wilson Beaton, pronouns she, her. Robin is an educator, a speaker, a writer, and an advocate for disability and sexuality. Robin combines years of personal experience with medically sound research to provide a unique perspective on how disability, life, and identity impact one's sexual and reproductive health and expression. She is the 2024 Carrie Buck Distinguished Fellow of the Lurie Institute for Disability Policy at Brandeis University. You can clap for that. Robin. Her speaking engagements do include multiple keynotes, panels, workshops, webinars, including the Executive Office of the Vice President of the United States, and 3 consecutive years speaking at the Adult Video News Convention in Las Vegas. Please join me in welcoming all of our panelists today. Thank you so much. We're going to begin with Madeline.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay? All right, mic's on. Hello, everybody. My name is Madeline Morcell. I am a senior attorney at the National Health Law Program. I am a multiply disabled bisexual white woman with shoulder-length brown hair, and am very short. And I am so glad to be here with you all. Thank you, Case Western, for having me. I'm going to talk about fighting intersectional discrimination in sexual and reproductive health care. This issue is super personal to me. I have lived experience with some of the issues I'm going to talk about on the sex discrimination and ableism axes of discrimination, but I'm going to talk about the interface with racism as well. Next slide. So a bit about the National Health Law Program. For over 55 years, we have fought for equitable healthcare access for low-income and undervalued communities through litigation, policy lawyering, and advocacy and legal education. We work with state and local partners in all 50 states and Puerto Rico, and we are guided by our equity stance, which denounces white supremacy and other systems of oppression, and our sexual and reproductive health practice area, which I have the privilege of being a part of, is, while we are not a reproductive justice organization, we have long applied a reproductive justice lens to our work and work very closely with reproductive justice partners. Next slide. I'm gonna just start with like level setting some key terms, and you're gonna hear this from other members of the panel as well. I'm going to start with the concept of intersectionality, which was first coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. Intersectionality is how multiple forms of discrimination, power, and privilege intersect in people's lives in ways that and compound to be more than the sum of their parts, in ways that are erased when systems such as sexism, racism, and ableism are treated separately. The matrix of domination adds another layer to this analysis. In addition to being structured along individual axes, such as race, gender, social class, and disability, the matrix of domination is structured on several levels. People experience and resist oppression on 3 levels: the level of personal biography, the group or community level, in which there's a cultural context created by all of those axes, and then the systemic level of social institutions. And this concept was introduced by another Black feminist. We owe so much to Black feminists for all of the foundational ideas for the advocacy that we do. This comes from Patricia Hill Collins in 1990, her book, Black Feminist Thought. Next slide. So how do racism, sexism, and ableism intersect in sexual and reproductive health care? We see compounded discrimination, again, more than the sum of their parts across sexual and reproductive health care delivery. The first space in which we see this is through the long history and still pervasive nature of reproductive coercion, including forced sterilization and a lack of informed consent in sexual and reproductive health care. This affects people with disabilities, particularly people with developmental disabilities, as well as other disabilities. And it also has long affected particularly Black people, as well as other people of color. And this dates back to the foundations of gynecology in this country, with the so-called father of gynecology, Marion Sims, experimenting on Black women to refine gynecological treatments without pain management. And we see the continued dismissal of pain on the basis of race and sex in our healthcare system today. We also see this through denials of access to services and related counseling, such as contraceptive counseling, and denials of language access, which are particularly important both for deaf and hard of hearing folks, as well as immigrant communities of color, and particularly not just immigrants, but immigrant communities of color who are more likely to be discriminated against on the basis of both race and national origin. So next slide. I'm going to talk a bit about some of the federal civil rights laws that help address these various forms of discrimination. The first that I'm going to talk about is Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act. This was a groundbreaking provision of the ACA that prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, disability, or any combination thereof in certain health programs and activities. It applies to most health insurance, it applies to most healthcare settings. And it was the reason that it is so groundbreaking is it expanded upon previous civil rights laws. It's the first federal law to prohibit intersectional discrimination in healthcare. And it was the first federal law to broadly address sex discrimination in healthcare. And it has gone through a number of iterations in terms of its regulatory implementation. There was first a 2016 final rule. The Obama administration first finalized a rule specifying the details of what this all means. The Trump administration rolls that back, particularly as it pertains to sex and intersectional discrimination in 2020, finalizing a second final rule. And just last year, the Biden administration finalized a third final rule on Section 1557, restoring and expanding upon much of the prior regs and preamble analysis. And the preamble to a rule is sort of the explanation about what do all of these regulatory provisions in the regulatory text really mean as applied to different situations. Next slide. So what did the regulatory text have for us as applied to the issues that we're here to talk about today? First, it restored the definition of sex discrimination that the Trump administration rescinded and defined sex discrimination to include pregnancy or related conditions, sex stereotypes, sexual orientation, gender identity, sex characteristics, including intersex traits. It also included provisions against discriminatory benefit design, such as discriminatory cost sharing or adverse cost sharing, placing, for example, all HIV drugs on a higher cost tier so that everybody with HIV who wants to access antiretroviral therapy has to pay more. It also included language access provisions, really critical to addressing language barriers to sexual and reproductive health care. And it added text that specifically says that the prohibited grounds are not just the individual axes of discrimination, but also any combination thereof, really clarifying and reaffirming that Section 1557 applies to intersectional discrimination. Next slide. The preamble had so much for us on sexual and reproductive health care. HHS really delivered on much of what we asked for. First, it included a renewed recognition that protections related to pregnancy or related to conditions include abortion. Abortion providers cannot deny access to abortion based on race or disability. Discrimination related to pregnancy-related decisions, past, present, or future, are prohibited under Section 1557. And it also included a lot of firsts specific to other forms of sexual and reproductive health care. The first of these that we pushed for is around obstetric violence. Earlier, Amanda mentioned that disabled people experience maternal mortality at 11, and this data is particularly around people with physical disabilities, experience maternal mortality at 11 times the rate of non-disabled people. Black and Indigenous women are experiencing maternal mortality in this country at 3 to 4 times higher the rate of white non-disabled people. And we know that Black and Indigenous and other people of color who are disabled experience compounded maternal health risks because of the intersectional discrimination in our healthcare system. We advocated for HHS to affirm that obstetric violence, policies and practices that subject birthing people to discriminatory mistreatment, such as rough handling, dismissal of pain, undertreatment of pregnancy-related conditions, shouting based on sex, race, and other bases may violate the law. Second, I want to talk about what we were able to secure on pain dismissal. So for millennia, sex stereotypes have driven healthcare providers in Western societies to discriminatorily misdiagnose women with hysteria. This literally dates back millennia to Hippocrates. And this is an umbrella explanation crafted to describe a wide range of symptoms that only affect people with uteruses. And the American Psychiatric Association actually recognized hysteria as a diagnosis in the DSM until 1980. So this is very recent history. And while that has phased out, the language has changed. That discrimination is still around. The language has changed. Now people are referred to as chronic complainers, but that discrimination is still there. We know that that particularly for women and people assigned female at birth, and particularly Black women, they continue to experience really acute discrimination around pain, resulting in decades-long diagnosis delays for conditions such as endometriosis and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. We also know that this results in the undertreatment of pain. Women and Black people are more likely to be prescribed sedatives rather than actual pain medications than white men. So we see this issue show up a lot in sexual and reproductive health care. I talked about its application in maternal care, but we also see this around, for example, dismissal of the severe pain that people with disabilities disproportionately experience for IUD insertion and removal. So it was a huge win for HHS to acknowledge that this can be a civil rights violation to dismiss pain on these bases. Next slide. I'm also going to talk briefly about Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. This is federal disability non-discrimination law. It does not cover intersectional discrimination, but Section 1557 incorporates Section 504. So anything that I'm about to talk about in the context of 504, if there's intersecting discrimination, we can get to that through Section 1557. So Section 504 was signed into law in 1973. It established the first federal civil rights protections for people with disabilities. This predates the ADA, and we continue to use it in healthcare because it gets to things more broadly than the ADA does. It prohibits disability discrimination, like Section 1557, by any entity that receives federal financial assistance. Again, this is most health insurers, most healthcare providers in a healthcare context. And last spring, at the disability community's urging, HHS updated its Section 504 regulations for the first time since 1977. Next slide. So two really big wins for sexual and reproductive health and justice in the regulatory text. First, a new provision on discrimination in medical treatment. This regulation prohibits discriminatory treatment, denials and limitations, denials of a treatment for a separate symptom or condition, or medical treatment provision that is based on an individual's disability in a discriminatory manner. There's also a win for family policing, which is an issue that disproportionately affects Black and other people of color and disabled people. There's a new regulation that focuses on the child welfare system to prohibit discrimination against individuals with disabilities in the child welfare system, including parents, prospective parents, foster parents, caregivers, and children. And recipients of federal financial assistance are prohibited from making decisions around child welfare based on speculation, stereotypes, or generalizations that a parent, caregiver, foster parent, or prospective parent, because of a disability, cannot safely care for a child. Next slide. There were so many firsts in the preamble. There's not enough time to talk about them all, but I'll just hit at a very high level. They affirmed at our urging that discriminatory denials or limits on access to HIV and STI screenings, mammograms, or contraceptives, or other preventive services on the basis of disability can violate the law. Forcing someone to receive a sexual and reproductive health care service, such as sterilization, because of their disability, can violate the law. And this includes not providing informed consent for a medically necessary sterilization. That can be a violation. Failure to provide comprehensive information about and access to assisted reproductive services, such as IVF or fertility preservation based on disability. This is something that particularly affects women and gender expansive people with sickle cell disease. This could be a violation. And all of these, again, may also violate Section 1557, which is really important for getting to that intersectional discrimination. Next slide. Unfortunately, the year is 2025, and we are living under early stage authoritarianism, and so the landscape is changing. There is a lot of litigation on the Section 1557 final rule, as well as the Section 504 final rule, and the underlying statute. As Mia mentioned earlier, there's a case, Texas versus Becerra, which is sort of designed with trans rights as a Trojan horse, because that there is a culture war around that civil rights issue. It's a Trojan horse for attempting to sink the whole 504 ship, the statute, not just the regs. So that's a huge concern right now. That case is currently on pause, but it has not gone away. We anticipate that HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, will propose new rules to gut both of the 2024 non-discrimination final rules. The first Trump administration, as I noted, gutted the Section 1557 rule from the Obama administration. They also filed a status report in Tennessee versus Becerra, one of the cases challenging the Section 1557 rule, where they said they're considering changes to the protections on sex discrimination. So they've now affirmed that on the record. Getting rid of these rules, these binary rules, is also in Project 2025, and we know that the president is implementing Project 2025. And we have seen through the early actions of the second administration, even pre-regulatory changes, them sort of pushing to the side what the regs and the preamble in the most recent rules say, and really seeking to weaponize federal non-discrimination rules to go after the communities that they're designed to protect. Next slide. So what can we do? First, we need to ensure a robust response to the new proposed rules when they come. NHELP has mobilized in the past and will mobilize again around sign-on comments as well as template comments for other advocates. It's really important, though, particularly in the era of AI, that we ensure unique comments to make sure that things are not sorted out, and really ensure volume of unique comments to slow down comment processing by the agencies and final rule finalization. It is really a big part of how we can ensure unique comments is making sure that we're mobilizing the communities who are impacted and served by these protections to share their personal stories about why these protections are important to us. This could help hold the line on some of the proposed changes that are coming. It also can help build a strong administrative record for litigation when we eventually challenge those new Trump final rules. Next slide. Thank you. I'll also say, barring acts of Congress, Section 1557 and Section 504 remain the law of the land, regardless of what the regs and preamble say. And so attorneys and advocates in the states should continue to enforce those laws, the statutes themselves. And while filing complaints to HHS administratively is not a good option right now, unfortunately, federal litigation remains an option, particularly depending on the circuit you're in. And for insurance-related discrimination, you can file a complaint with your state insurance commissioner for free. Anyone can do this. You don't have to be a lawyer, and they can help enforce the law. Next slide. Finally, we need to enforce and shore up state non-discrimination protections. Very few states have their own non-discrimination laws that get at intersectional discrimination in healthcare. The grounds of state non-discrimination laws vary and the covered entities vary. So this is a huge priority for us right now. Where feasible, where the political environment allows, state advocates should consider advocating for robust state laws that mirror or ideally expand upon what Section 1557 does. And we're here at the National Health Law Program to support advocates in exploring what that can look like, particularly for me and my practice, ensuring robust protections against intersectional discrimination in sexual and reproductive health care. Next slide. Finally, I'll just highlight our website is www.healthlaw.org. Our sexual and reproductive health practice area has its own section of the site, and we have a sexual and reproductive health equity landing page where all of our SRH equity and justice work is housed. And there's a section within the resource library there that specifically focuses on all of our resources around sexual and reproductive health equity for disabled people. So with that, I will pass the baton. Thank you.
Thank you. Robin?
Yes.
Want to go ahead?
All right. Hi. Okay. After that wonderful presentation outlining this. Okay. Okay. So I'm Robin Wilson Beating, and I'm a disability and sexuality educator, an advocate, and I am someone who exists at the intersection of disability, race, gender, and queerness. And I'm also someone who is multiply disabled. Oh yes, I was getting ready to do that. Yeah. Yes. All right, let me go back. All right. I'm Robin. I am a Black middle-aged woman with curly hair, and I'm wearing glasses and bright red lipstick. I am multiply disabled, physically, neurologically, mental illness. I feel like I keep collecting disabilities like Pokemon cards, especially as I age, but that is living with a disability. I am also a mother, both from being pregnant and giving birth as a disabled person. And also I am a mother through adoption. So I'm also a person who has had an abortion in the South, pre-Trump. And overturning Roe v. Wade, but it still was quite an ordeal. And at that time, you were allowed to discriminate against someone having an abortion with a disability, because that happened to me. And so I'm here talking about several things, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about is kind of what the impact of, this current administration. I recently have changed some things around because on Monday, they let go of a lot of different departments at the CDC. I have a friend that works there who works in the communications department, and she was like, our HIV AIDS section is just like gone. Our health, equity, anything that had to do with like maternal health or any of those kind of things, she was like gone. STD, sexually transmitted infectious diseases, gone. So, I'm sitting here going, okay, well, all right, so then what is that going to look like for getting equitable, for studying the inequities and for being able to rectify the health inequities that come, from an intersectional experience. Because for, disabled people, especially those of us who are Black, brown, queer, or trans, healthcare access is a constitutional and a civil rights issue. And when these protections under, the ACA are weakened, when Medicaid is under threat, and when reproductive autonomy is restricted, those aren't like abstract policy debates. They are denials of their fundamental right to bodily autonomy. And they are disproportionately lethal to people living at those intersections. So we can talk about equal protection under the law and how the 14th Amendment promises that no person should be denied the equal protection of these laws. But states are passing laws, criminalizing gender affirming care, or when disabled people of color are disproportionately criminalized and incarcerated. You have to ask, like, whose equity is being protected? And disability rights also, of course, deserve attention, but there's not really the robust enforcement that is needed. There's not adequate funding and intersectional implementation. And so it becomes this promise unfulfilled. And it disproportionately affects those already marginalized by racism and other forms of discrimination. So, consider the intersection of disability and policing. And according to the Ruderman Family Foundation, up to half of the people killed by police have a disability. Black disabled people are especially at risk. And this is kind of a failure of both the civil rights and the criminal justice systems. In education, students with disabilities, particularly queer youth of color, are over-policed, under-supported, and pushed out of school. We've talked before about how disabled children aren't even receiving sexual education, and if they do receive sexual education, but it is not recognizing or addressing disability and, being in a relationship or sexuality or, sexual expression. There are discriminatory discipline policies and the lack of the accommodations that violate, both, IDEA and Title IX, Title IX protections. And then there's that matter of erasure. Intersectionality, as we've heard coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, it's not merely academic. It's a necessary legal lens, but yet it's often absent from constitutional and statutory interpretation. And that erasure, it's not neutral. It is harmful, and so part of that, you have to sit there and go, okay, so who's missing from the conversation when it comes to leaderships, when it comes to writing up these policies, and who's being heard? And because if your advocacy doesn't center the most marginalized, it's incomplete. If your theory of justice, it doesn't include the disabled, queer, the radicalized, the poor, then it's not justice. It's hierarchy in disguise. And the law can be a tool of liberation or oppression. And so, our call is, we get to choose how we're going to wield it, and don't need allies, we need accomplices in doing this. And so it, I can talk about experiences, but there are also other things that other people want to say. But in short, there's like, this is really important to talk about, but no, but the barriers that exist, they affect a person's access to respectful, comprehensive, and inclusive reproductive health care. And I could share personal experiences and how that has affected me as a person of color, but needless to say, as having been in many instances where it has been my race, and and from the treatment, from the doctors, the biases, the cultural biases that that healthcare professionals came into that with, it affected the outcomes, my healthcare outcomes. Things went undiagnosed for years. I was almost one of the figures of Black maternal death. As a result of not, being listened to, also not being encouraged to abort the pregnancy that I had, and because I was disabled, being, told, like, why aren't you on birth control, from an old white doctor, when they saw that I was pregnant and disabled. He's like, why aren't you on birth control if you knew you were going to be like this? So it is kind of heartening to hear about the preamble and hearing about the laws and things that, were, kind of put in place to help prevent, some of these things, these things that were happening to me, and, that I mentioned happened in, the 2000s. And so hearing about that legislation and hearing that being put into 1557, that's encouraging to hear, but but also I'm like, yeah, and that's probably one of the first things they're gonna get. And so that's just kind of want to leave with that. This is very important, that in addressing intersectionality in this in reproductive and sexual health care.
I want to make sure that we don't echo Robin's challenge to all who are here today to not be an ally. And I must speak openly when I say that formative allyship is contagious. And it is also fatal. And we're tired of it. So please, 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 please aid and abet and be an accomplice. We would appreciate it. Let's go to Darren, please.
Hello. Hi, power to the people. Power to the people. All power to the people. I'm Dara Baldwin, as was said. I'm an activist first, as you can see. And I also am not a lawyer. I am a public policy person. Also not a person with a disability yet. I keep telling people as I live longer, that won't happen to me. But I've been a co-conspirator for years, and love everyone in this room. And thank you to Kate and everyone for having this conversation. I'm gonna bring in some of the activist things. As it was said, I'm also from DC, so I say DC stay hood, DC stay hood, DC stay hood. And if you don't understand why, now you should actually know why. But also I wanted to bring in land acknowledgement. I know where I am from. I am on stolen indigenous land of the Piscataway and Anacostia people. I do not know the land here in Ohio, but we are on stolen indigenous land. And so let me come from that space. Genocide has been here since the day white folks got here.
It's the Delaware.
Right? Thank you. It's the Delaware tribe. So let's honor that land and knowing who that tribe is and that this is their land. And we are talking on their ancestors who were committed to fighting for their rights. And I say that because what reproductive justice, I was there, I am that old, when we started reproductive justice and moving that and having those conversations back then. I've been doing this work for over 30 years. I also wanted to bring in the fact of disability justice. It hasn't really been discussed here, so I just wanted to say that a little bit, that disability justice came out of the frustration of many young folks who I saw coming to DC as fellows, coming to DC and not seeing themselves, whether they were Black, Indigenous, people of color, or queer, they are not in DC. At the time that I was doing the work, I'm the only person of color sitting in DC. Only person of color, all right, doing policy work at these large organizations that you hear, who to this day the number still goes. Do not hire BIPOC folks, do not hire LGBTQ folks to do policy work that affects them. Listen to what I'm saying. That is also in my book and what I discussed. So I just wanted to say that disability justice centers BIPOC, disabled folks. And if we remove, and I say this to my fellow social justice folks who do this work, when we remove the barriers of BIPOC disabled people, we will remove the barriers of everyone else. And that is what it's centered on, and the 10 principles of the first one being intersectionality, which me and discuss some of the tenets. And I want to go and talk about intersectionality. And Kimberly Crenshaw is not only my dear friend, but also my sorority sister. I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. But I also want to say that it was said here a little bit. Her theory comes from the academic lens and from a legal scholar lens. And many of you know the case. So in 1974, there was the Combahee River Collective, which was by Beverly Smith and Barbara Smith and Demetria Frazier, who they talked about intersectionality from the social aspect and the social concept in 1974 in Boston, because they were discussing, remember in 1974, the white feminists who were not including them and in their work, not only being Black, but being queer, and socialists and what that meant. So I just want to make sure we bring that in as well when we talk about it. And if you have never read the Combahee River Collective essay, you really should. So that you know and understand that work started in 1974. And Kimberly Crenshaw has acknowledged this, and we've had these conversations that that's where she got her start to put us into her 1989 article. So I just wanted to say that. Doesn't mean one is better than the other. It just means one is looking at from a different lens, right? They were actually right in the community talking about it. And specifically from a reproductive justice space, because it was the abortion, right? What else was going on in 74? Hello, okay. So I just wanted to bring that up. And also here today, we haven't really talked about the fact of why the ADA was created. The ADA was not just about doors and ramps. It was about community integration. If you know what's going on. And I say this because I see people shaking their head, but not everyone understands that. Who in this room or people in this room make noise if you've heard of the ugly laws? If you have not heard of the ugly laws, you can Google it and look what it means. Many people have not heard of that, 1865. And what it said basically is if you had a disability, you were not allowed in public spaces. I'm gonna let that sit. You were not allowed in public spaces, school, church, or any faith-based place, the park. And you surely wasn't going for any kind of reproductive services or anything else. So this concept of why that ghost, the ugly law ghost, still lingers within our work and what is happening around that, right? So I wanted to say that. And back to disability justice. In all movements in this country that have started from a space of rights, Black and brown people have created justice. Because we as a people have been hit by this and oppressed by this work in a different way. And so I want to make that connection as well. What was not discussed here are the people who are still in institutions. Even the reproductive rights, white women who we constantly told, and I can say we because I was there, you cannot forget Black and brown women experience life in a different way. Domestic violence. We had that coming to us. We at a higher rate were hitting and unhoused and being unhoused. We were not getting our education that we should get. We were not being taken care of through our environmental. I'm from Newark, New Jersey. You know about Newark, New Jersey. Agent Orange was created. The factory is there in our town, in our city. And right, you name it, all kinds of environmental issues are happening to us. That is not happening in white neighborhoods. So you have to include and add that. That is what justice is about our whole entire life. And of course, finally, law enforcement and being institutionalized. And the reproductive rights community looked at us and said, well, we don't care about people who are going to jail or who are in prisons. And that was the space we had to take up. And we had to say, well, we do. And therefore, this has to expand. And that is why justice is added to, except for environmental justice was around way before climate change. And we were doing that work. But now we have housing justice. We have transportation justice, because Black and brown folks can no longer follow the model of rights. As we discussed here, I appreciate and love and honor our lawyers and the court systems, but we have to work like this is a spoke in a wheel. You are one of the spokes. You are important. And as I keep asking my friends who do this work, we are now at a space where, and I asked this November 8th, 9th, whatever that day afterwards, what happens when he doesn't listen to the courts? And my legal friends like, oh no, that's not gonna happen. Everybody listens to the courts. And I was like, oh my God. Okay, and then jumped to February 23rd when I had the conversation, said, now what happens when he doesn't listen to the courts? And they're saying, oh, we got some legal students looking into that guy. Because we're in that space right now, and because that's why reproductive justice was created, is because we could not get the rights model to fit into what was happening in our lives, and you never will. That is why we have disability justice and reproductive rights. And I just wanted people to understand that and see that connection. And you cannot have both, because disability justice negates what disability rights is about. The disability rights community still sits and says, I don't know about intersectionality, I don't really understand that. And they sure as heck are not doing collective liberation, which is the 10th principle. They create laws that will help one group of people, even within their own space. We don't do that in justice work, right? I was explaining to people, because people are like collective liberation. For many years, we're fighting Black Lives Matter, and for many years, we're fighting Black women. I have the policy brief from all of us, a sister song, and saying you need to codify Roe versus Wade. And not being listened to as Black women, and what we were told, you don't understand precedents, you don't understand the court system, you don't understand what's going on here. Okay, no problem. And here we are. So what you have to do is say is that you cannot just listen to one group of people in this work. And so that is what we need to do, is to move and say, we are going to center Black and brown people in this work. And I brought up the fact of institutionalization. It also goes the other way. I have been talking to many of us, to our abolitionist community. I am a Black liberationist and an abolitionist, let me be clear to you. I think Mia said it one way, I'm gonna say it another way. I am in no way a progressive. Progressives are just as racist as conservatives, it's just that you do it covertly. I would rather see you coming. That's what Mia said. Progressive stab us in our back, sitting on the bench next to us that Malcolm X discussed when he said, I'd rather be in South Africa than here in the United States, because at least my racism was right in my face. And so therefore, when you talk about institutionalization with abolitionists, they only talk about jail and prisons. They are now expanding that. We're talking to them that it is any place that holds a Black body or bodies in bondage. And let me tell you, for disabled folks, that's every space they enter. The space we are in today, right here at Case, is a space of bondage for every person that has a disability in this room. It is the same for me as a Black woman. People always say to me, do you worry about your safety? And I say a prayer every time I go out of a door. I went out of, and I got room 504. Isn't that funny? At the hotel. I went out of room 504 today and said a prayer. And I said a prayer when I get home. It's the same for disabled people. I got out today safely and I got back home safely. And I still have the same things that I need, want, and desire. So I just want us to understand that we cannot forget our disabled people who are in institutions and their reproductive rights. And these conversations continue to happen about people who are in the community. The ADA was about getting those people out of those institutions. The last thing I'm gonna say, and I say this to you all, I discuss many of these things in my book, but this, as lawyers and as people who talk about Supreme Court cases, if you all don't stop saying the Olmstead case, it is disrespectful to the Black woman who was on the other side of that V, Lois Curtis. Say her full name, stop with these initials, and when you refer to it, you say Olmstead v. Lois Curtis. If you all can't even give a case that you are using every single day to stop the fighting and give respect to the Black woman who helped to get it done, the work you are doing negates everything else. And if it wasn't for Lois Curtis, there would be no reproductive justice work for disabled people because they would still be institutionalized. They are institutionalized now at a high rate, but we have got to not dismiss the people who don't have a say, a voice, or even a vision of being seen in the community. So that is what I put forward to you. If you want to do some of this work, you can join Interrupting Criminalization. Just Google that. It is through Miriam Kava and Andrea Ritchie, where we have been doing this work for almost 15 years now, which I can't believe. But the public health model is a racist and ableist model, and we're moving it to a better model. Thank you for having me here, and I look forward to more conversation.
I sincerely appreciate you ensuring that it is not Olmstead VLC, but Lois Curtis. We do, unfortunately, have a history in this nation of utilizing the power and the respect that was gained on the backs of Black folks to further advocacy, to further rights, and yet our legacy remains a lost legacy. Do not erase us if you wish to ink us. Please. Let's move forward to Bessa.
Okay, the mic.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Bessa Cosmo. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman in my early 40s. I'm a little person and a wheelchair user for those who can't see me. Long blonde hair, wearing a Black outfit. And glad to be here today on some of the most important and personal topics that I care about. And I'm also the founding director of an organization called Detroit Disability Power. Mia talked about local grassroots organizations. That is us through and through. We are a scrappy group of multiply marginalized disabled organizers in Detroit, really moving and shaking things up in Detroit and across the state of Michigan. I'm really proud of my team and the work that we've been able to do together. We're all about building political power for the disability community. We're all about dismantling systems of oppression, knowing that they're all interlinked and prop each other up and collude with each other to harm the people that we care about. And I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a healthcare practitioner, but I am a disabled person who's navigating these systems. And I'm the director of an organization that got 300 members who are navigating these systems and many more supporters and friends in the fight. So I'm actually gonna just start with two stories, one personal and one professional, that I think uplift the themes of today's conversation. and actually really center my experience and what it feels like to be a disabled person and an advocate navigating the different spaces that we're kind of talking about. So I'll start with the personal story. The next sentence is going to sound silly. I'm going to start with the personal story, but from a professional perspective. I do a lot of anti-ableism workshops. We do probably 50 of them a year at my organization, reaching thousands of people. And a few years ago, I started doing specific anti-ableism workshops around medical ableism for medical professionals. So I go into hospitals and other places and I talk to doctors about like, these are the things you're doing that are really harming disabled people. This is how it's part of a bigger system of ableism and all of this. And those workshops have been the hardest for me to do because they are re-traumatizing, as you can imagine. And so over the years, I've gotten more proficient at doing them. I'm feeling more confident about them, all of this. And it's just been really clear to me that sharing my personal experience with them has been important so that they're more aware. And that while it's hard for me, I have the ability to do it, and so I'm going to do it. And that relates to the personal story, which has to do with me, like Robin shared, not getting proper diagnosis, being mistreated by healthcare professionals, and it really damaging my health. So I don't know, 5 or 7 years ago, my partner and I decided it's time to have a kid. We were super excited about that. But because I'd encountered so much ableism in medicine, I didn't want to like go talk to my gynecologist about it. I was like, I'm just gonna get pregnant. We're gonna keep this as unmedical as possible. We're gonna just chill and do it over here. 2 years later, I still wasn't pregnant and I was really sad. And I eventually ended up going to the doctor and realizing I had stage 4 endometriosis, which is why I wasn't getting pregnant. And I would never get pregnant without the assistance of IVF. And this was really distraughtful news for us. But we found an IVF clinic that some queer friends recommended, because the last thing I wanted to do was go endure such an invasive thing with doctors who didn't understand that what it meant to be disabled, or who didn't think I should be getting IVF because I'm disabled, etc. And so some queer friends told me about a clinic they used. I went there. It turns out it was fabulous. I was treated really well, which I was super surprised about, but happy about. I now recommend them to all sorts of disabled friends of mine who are trying to get pregnant. In fact, one of my disabled friends who just had a baby this week after going to IVF there, actually advocated for them to get an accessible scale, which I had never used before in my life as a wheelchair user. And if you've ever been pregnant, you get weighed a lot, unless you're a wheelchair user and you can't get weighed a lot. So, you know, I went through IVF multiple times. I'm very happy to say I'm a 1.5-year-old little kid who's just precious and wonderful, and quite naughty. But, you know, not long after he was born, our governor, who's a pro-choice governor, put out a call. This is when IVF was being attacked, particularly down in Alabama, you remember. Okay, so our governor put out a call and said, if you've had IVF, tell us your story. We want to uplift your story. And I was like, okay, you know, I had been a Planned Parenthood organizer in my 20s, and I had, you know, been fighting for comprehensive sex ed and abortion rights and all this. I never thought that 25 years later, I'd be fighting to protect IVF. I never thought that was going to be my thing, and then it was. And so I was like, okay, we could share our story. We submitted a little story and a photograph of our family. And I see this photograph and I see a multiracial, interabled family with a baby, and it warms my heart. That's not how everyone took it, right? So immediately online, I started getting attacked because I worked for Planned Parenthood 20 years ago. No wonder I was infertile. No wonder I had to get IVF. I deserved it, right? This was the line. This was the line. I was like, wow, you know, they need to get a life and get something to do besides attacking me. So, you know, they linked, they tagged like my personal information on the internet, and like, it was a thing because I used IVF, because I used to be an organizer at Planned Parenthood 20 years ago, right? So anyway, so that's one experience of like how ableism prevented me from going to the doctor, prevented me from getting pregnant for years. And then, you know, when I spoke out about it, people were mad that I'm pro-choice. So The other story I want to share is actually a story that I encountered professionally, and it's in 2020 and 2021. So really like the height of COVID. And it's about COVID, but I think you'll see how it's relevant in the sense that it's very much about intersectionality and the importance of taking an intersectional approach. But also as I'm thinking out about like what is going to happen as our healthcare system, our legal system is dismantled by this administration, we're going to have to start figuring out different ways of providing care to people. So as states, like maybe Michigan, which is maybe a little more attuned to the kind of things that we care about, as states, as organizations, and even as just like groups of people are figuring out how to provide care for each other, in the absence of like federal funding or like a functional federal government, like we're going to have to think about how do we do that in ways that actually support the different needs of people living at different intersections. It seems to me like a public health crisis is around the corner. Like very, very deep, troubling public health crisis is around the corner. And so thinking about like what did we learn from these COVID experiences that we can actually use again. So in 2020, I was appointed by the governor to the Racial Disparities Task Force for COVID-19, which was a real honor. And I was really grateful to be in that space. And presumably I was brought into that space because I have, I'm the biggest pain in the governor's ass when it comes to disability stuff. So that's how I got there. We'll say it. I wouldn't expect anything. Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, I wear that proudly. The task force was largely made up of Michigan Department of Health and Human Services staff, you know, a lot of medical professionals, doctors, public health officials, some elected officials, a handful, like 3 or 4 community/advocates like myself, and the majority of the people who were there were state of Michigan employees. So that's the makeup of the group. And I will say that we did really impactful, meaningful work. We solved problems in very direct ways. So I'm really proud of the work. If you remember, in the beginning of COVID, New York, Detroit, and New Orleans were the hardest hit cities. These 2 of them are majority Black cities, Detroit and New Orleans. And so there was a great disparity of who, particularly in the state of Michigan, who was getting and dying from COVID was mostly African-American people. And so the work that the task force did really did flatten that disparity in pretty remarkable ways. And yet, there was no room for intersectionality at that table. It was very disturbing. I brought up disability every single week for 18 months on that call. No one else was bringing up disability, for the record. I was the most annoying broken record that I could possibly be, because that's why I was there, right? And every time I brought it up, there was crickets, just crickets, like no commitment, no great idea, let's work on that, right? Just like, cool, next. And you know, honestly, it was really bad for my mental health. It was really bad to be saying like, hey, my people here, my disabled brothers and sisters are not being addressed, but we're here to address health disparity. Like how? And it was bad for my mental health. It felt like gaslighting. I kept like yelling into this abyss about what I knew was happening to disabled Detroiters. It was really infuriating to me. It felt like a giant waste of time. And also, of course, this is like during the worst 18 months of COVID. So I was also dealing with all of that with all of you. The chair of the task force actually very plainly told me that any intersecting conversation was just a distraction from race. I understand as a white woman that I'm not the right messenger in that moment. So I want to really own that. And I also want to acknowledge that he said that because he has been harmed by racism probably his entire life. He has been dismissed and the conversation has been changed when he's tried to bring up legitimate experiences of his own. So I have a lot of compassion for where that comes from. And at the same time, I was watching the state of Michigan offer life-saving information in inaccessible ways. I was watching them put up vaccine clinics that I could never get into as a wheelchair user. I was watching them do data collection and not include disabled people who we now know were absolutely the hardest hit by COVID. And we knew it then because it was our folks dying, but nobody was listening. And so, and also, I mean, if you think about if I'm talking about disabled Detroiters, 90% of those people are Black. So it's actually not a distraction from the conversation. It is a completion of the conversation. It is centering the most impacted, which is what we need to do, as was said, to actually solve problems. So I lift that up as like, here we were doing this really great work, but it wasn't intersectional, so it wasn't as great as it could have been. And I think we're going to be finding ourselves in more positions where we're having to do ad hoc work that I believe should be done by a functional government. But we don't have a functional government. And so how do we make sure that we're really bringing all the pieces and having all the right people, not only at the table, but then actually listening to them when they're there. I would say, like, in the case of that task force, the lack of intersectional thinking is partly an unwillingness to hold the complexity. Like it is maybe harder to center the most marginalized or vulnerable people. I also think it's just ableism. Like people don't think about disabled people. People don't want to think about disabled people. It makes them feel weird. They avoid it. And I think it's also partly that it's bureaucracy. The state does not move quickly, does not have any room for relationship building or like actually the kind of things that allow us to be more comprehensive in our approach. So I hope those stories are like somewhat interesting in terms of like how we're dealing with this moment in time. And I think the kind of last thing I'll share for now is just about how, you know, as a young woman, as a disabled young woman, I didn't know anything about like disability rights or justice. I didn't have a big disability community, but I did know that feminism spoke to me in a way, and I was really interested in reproductive and sexual health, and I was really interested in abortion rights. Later, as I began to understand my disability identity more, and I started to understand and learn about disability rights and justice, I realized like the connection was bodily autonomy. And the thing that really drew me in about feminism was this sense of like, this is my body. Like I make decisions about my body. That's also what makes me care about disability justice. And, you know, as we said, like as a disabled person, a sense of bodily autonomy is everything to my sense of well-being. It's everything to my sense of well-being. And what I'm seeing happening right now is we're really entering, we are in an era of eugenics and we are entering authoritarianism, is that ableism is this kind of necessary system of oppression to pave the way for the removal of undesirable people. And, you know, ableism, like by labeling some bodies, literally some bodies, normal, correct, good, and other bodies, weird, deficient, bad, we're paving the way for like pretty radical dehumanization, neglect, and erasure, which has come up several times today. Not just of disabled people, but of all people, which we've already done the damage of labeling that some bodies can be good and bad. And I think in a great way, disabled people, disabled bodies and minds are the spokes in, the stick in the wheel of capitalism, and also the stick in the wheel of egomaniacs. They can't handle it, right? The fear of vulnerability or disability, the weird feeling they have when they're around those people, right? I think there's a tremendous power there. And I think that's why they're attacking us and they're scared. So, you know, whether they're wiping out disabled people through all of the things you all know are happening, I'm not gonna like make the long list of executive orders, but you know, it might be to justify saving money, it might be to justify purifying the race, whatever weird combo of eugenic authoritarian stuff they're doing, the first step is making people believe that we're not fully human. And that's the oldest trick in the book. That sounds just like racism, and that sounds just like sexism, and that's exactly what transphobia is. So, you know, if we're not fighting like all the fights, we are missing out. We got to protect all people. And I'm really heartened to hear that is the approach that folks are taking. Thank you.
We have time for some questions.
We did have one question in the chat really quickly that I want to uplift, and it was from Robin. You mentioned a statistic about 50% of people killed by police being disabled people of color. Is that correct? Am I remember that right?
Being disabled people and a large proportion of
Okay.
people of color.
Folks are just asking if you could share where you got that from. I'm so sorry, I know you mentioned it.
Yeah, the Rudman, yeah, that's how you got it. The Rudman Foundation. And I have, yes, the Rudman Foundation.
The Rudman Foundation, wonderful.
Well, this is Dara, just so you know, there are people who are also fighting what that says in the because of the way their methodology and how they did it. And interrupting criminalization, if you read Andrea Ritchie's book, Invisible No More, she cites even more because what they did not do was look at the communities of trans, Black folks, immigrant Black folks. That was not in their methodology. So we think that number is higher. Trigger warning, if you do decide to read Andrea Ritchie's book, do not sit and try to read that book in one sitting. It's a 9-chapter book. It took me, I read a book a week. It took me 9 months. I read a chapter a month because it is that deep. And I know Andrea well, and I helped her. It took her 9 years to write it. So understanding that was in there, but that report is being negated because of its methodology and not including communities. Again, coming from a rights perspective, you're not going to include communities that Black people look at all the time. Queer, right, unhoused, immigrants, right? That's not what's that.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much.